Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and I want to first thank my colleague Kevin for inviting me to give this lecture. I'm very grateful. My name is Bettini, and today I will discuss with you gendered experiences of resource extraction and environmental justice in anthropology and in more specifically in Aotearoa, New Zealand, my regional expertise. Before I start, I want, however, to introduce myself briefly. I am Dr. Bettini. As I said, I'm an environmental anthropologist specializing in energy and visual ethnography. I'm originally from Italy, and I've traveled since a very young age. Lived abroad in New Zealand when I was 16, and when I was 20 years old, I moved to the United States, where I completed my studies at Central Washington University Studies, and I received my Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology and my Bachelor of Science in Primate Behavior and Ecology. There I had the opportunity to work with chimpanzees, and I was going to continue on this career trajectory of becoming a primatologist. But a series of events brought me back to New Zealand, and it's one of my favorite countries. And I continued to my studies and went to graduate schools and completed my Masters of Arts in social anthropology at the University of Kent in United Kingdom in 2015. And I then began my PhD at the University of Alberta, which I recently completed in 2021. Both during my master's and PhD, I focused on New Zealand and as my regional expertise. Currently, I'm a postdoctoral research associate at the University of Calgary, where I continue to focus on my research interest in energy, human-environment relations, and more in particular, energy transitions here in Canada and New Zealand. Always looking at this topic from an anthropological point of view and with an interdisciplinary lens. So over the next 30 to 40 minutes or so, I'm going to discuss with you, like I said, the gendered experience of resource extraction and environmental justice. I will share with you aspects of my doctoral project in which I focus on the ways people experience changes in their sense of place and identity as extraction and environmental degradation occurs around them. I will share some of the women's stories I encountered more specifically, and I decide to divide the lecture in two parts. So in the first part, I will briefly offer a background on what anthropology of extraction and environmental anthropologists do, offering a short history of this subdiscipline within anthropology. And then I will continue with a brief discussion on what is meant by environmental justice and how anthropologists study this topic as they interact with environmental activists. In the second part of this presentation, I will offer personal experiences through my project discussing women's experiences with activism, their stories, and the reasons why they've been involved in environmental movements. I hope that through this presentation, I can stress the importance of an ethnographic approach in grasping how extraction can deeply impact entire communities and how ethnography can help shed light on the cultural and environmental risks that many people face when extraction occurs. So, environmental anthropology is a field that within sociocultural anthropology that examines the relationships between humans and their environment across space and time. Environmental anthropology makes an effort to understand how the environment shapes human culture and society, and how human beings shape up the environment as well. Environmental anthropologists focus on chronically issues of justice and accessibility posed by ecological resources. We're looking at various aspects of the economy and developing new ways of thinking about how we connect with other species as well, taking into account historical trajectories, including colonial, imperial, and military, that shape contemporary views about specific landscapes and the broader world. If we look at the history of environmental anthropology, various theories have emerged during the 1950s and 1960s that started to explain our relationship with nature and the dichotomy nature-culture, and leading to what environmental anthropology is now today. Julian Stewart is considered a significant figure and founder of cultural ecology, which influenced deeply the development of environmental anthropology, and he tried in his work in the American Southwest to try to understand to explain the way culture in terms of the environment in which it existed. And so with this cultural ecology until 1970s, anthropologists were following this school of thoughts, and then later on they decided to form new school of thoughts, including ethnoecology and historical ecology. And it's only in the 1990s that we see environmental anthropology actually gaining popularity as we know it nowadays, and providing a more inclusive umbrella to a diverse community of anthropologists. The term environmental anthropology and it's mainly used also in the United States, while sometimes we see in Europe interchanging between environmental and ecological anthropology to mean the same discipline. Looking at an anthropology of extraction and energy, in particular, anthropologists have only recently begun to organize their work on these topics. Previously, in the 60s, and there was more concern toward the policies and understanding more generally energy. It was only in the 70s that anthropologists started to document sociocultural environmental impacts of energy development, especially for vulnerable communities and indigenous people. However, from 1980s to the early 2000s, anthropologists lost their interest in energy. And for almost 2 decades, there was scarce anthropological research. And then a revitalization of the field occurred very recently, sparked by renewed concerns about geopolitical uncertainty of energy, the US onshore oil and gas production boom and hydraulic fracturing, and climate change initiatives as well. And just like for energy, anthropologists have only very recently started to engage with environmental justice and the concept of environmental justice. When we use this concept, this centers around the belief that all people have a right to a healthy living environment and fair treatment through environmental laws and regulations. And it affirms the sacredness of Mother Earth, ecological unity, and the interdependence of all species and the right to be free from ecological destruction. Environmental justice seeks fairness in how environmental burdens and risks are lived and experienced by poor people, women, communities of color, indigenous people, minorities, and so on. In recent years, more environmental justice ethnographies have developed and have helped advance the processes of meaning making that communities employ as they confront the histories and the contemporary realities of toxic exposure, pollution, and environmental degradation. Ethnographic environmental justice studies have long worked to explore the ways in which community groups are excluded from environmental decision-making, data collection, planning, and enforcement of regulations. Women worldwide played a significant role in the environmental justice movement as they work for an intergenerational justice that would ensure cleaner, safer home communities for their own and succeeding generation. Numerous social scientific studies have identified the pivotal role of women in grassroots environmental activists, both in general and specific regions. And much of the existing literature, however, has emphasized traditional feminine gender expectation, often associated with caring behavior, and so women participating in environmental activist movements because of it's a natural extension of them being caregivers for broader communities they occupy. So, however, since 2010 and 2015, there have been more studies and ethnography of women environmental activists that have aimed to grasp reasons behind the involvement that they go beyond that stereotypical explanation, reductive explanation of women choosing to intervene because of a caring attitude or because of motherly instinct. Willow and Keefer discussed this in depth by collecting in their study and analyzing women experiences and expectation and identities in shale energy positions in the US. And their study showed that women motives are diverse, driven by political choices as well as personal interest for nature and environment, and not exclusively linked to traditional gendered explanations. Likewise, Jensen and Rondon in their studies on women anti-money activism in the Andes and Peru and Ecuador stressed a similar point, underlying how negotiating conflicts is a resilient fight that stems from various perceptions and experiences toward the environment, and it is fundamental to develop a more longitudinal understandings of the changing nature of women's resilience. Likewise, Sempertegui considers also important to include the lived experience of indigenous women, but also urging, she brings the urge to reflect that the indigenous women activism has also been shaped and transformed by the alliance with other groups, other minorities that in the area have created a multiplicity of different forms of resistance, which also I, in our research in New South Wales, Australia, discusses as well and stresses as well, pointing out how the variety of experiences gathered, in our case, among women opposing natural resource extraction, often goes beyond the expectation and the human experiences itself. So it's important to look at women involvement in activism beyond that lens of women equals and caring attitude equals motherly. So therefore, that's why they get involved. So in the second part of this presentation and conversation I'm having with you, I will discuss my experience through my project, sharing my fieldwork research in which I mainly investigated fossil fuel extraction, in particular fracking in Taranaki, New Zealand, and how this has impacted communities. But I also had experiences with women being involved in activism, and I will share this with you. So for those unfamiliar, as I said, I focused on fracking in Taranaki, New Zealand. And for those unfamiliar with fracking, when we talk about this extractive method or practice, we refer to an extraction method that combines horizontal and vertical drilling, creating fractures aimed at releasing trapped pockets of oil and gas through fluid injection at high pressure. Through the years, fracking has been widely contested as documentaries and reports have raised concerns about the non-environmental risks linked to this activity, ranging from water quality, discharging of toxic substances, air emissions released during the processing. And in Taranaki, in New Zealand, fracking has been done mainly in Taranaki. And before continuing any further though, it's important to understand the geology and the geography of this area, because as you can see in this map, Taranaki is located in the southwestern part of the North Island. And entire New Zealand is a very highly seismic country. So this area is very prone to earthquakes, and it's an area where there is also an dormant volcano, which is the main feature of the Taranaki's landscape. And this dormant volcano has erupted at least 9 times, and it's overdue to erupt again. So in this region, fracking has been going on around a dormant volcano, and this is, as I said before, a highly seismic zone. So, so it seems that it's not a very it's not an ideal place where to conduct fracking. However, since 1989, this type of operation has been going on, and this area is a predominant agricultural and rural region. However, more than 100 fracking operations have been undertaken in 39 wells, and 5 companies more. Right now, there are 5 companies that have been granted resource consent to drill. In the past, there have also been companies like Shell and Tag Oil that have operated in the area. However, all these companies have established their presence through the years, built their wells near houses and schools, and shared the land with dairy farms and cattle. And they've completely shaped the landscape, and communities have, of course, raised different concerns. So in my research, I consider those indirect forms of environmental activism and justice as I listened and recorded the stories and experiences and perspectives of individuals and communities that were impacted by this form of extraction. I say indirectly, I looked at this environmental activism because my primary focus was to understand more holistically the way extraction shapes one's sense of place and belonging. So I wasn't limiting myself to a group of people. I was looking at what engineers thought, people working in the oil and gas sector thought, what conservationists had to say, and so on. So this was an approach that for me was a way to avoid limiting to one's view and have a better understanding of the situation in Taranaki. However, I did interact, as I said, and interview people that became activists or were activists in the area. And I grasped the struggles that they experienced. And for many, they decided to turn this struggle into a need to actively participate in protecting their place and their connection to it. So as I engaged with community members and activists in the region, I recorded their struggles, their resistance. I learned about their perseverance, their way they want to protect their house, their homes, their place, and the connection they have with the land, and the defenses they mounted against the impacts of extraction. So as seen in the other cases I mentioned, women also in this region were actively involved organizing events. And so during my fieldwork between 2017 and 2019, I had the chance to participate and observe some of these grassroots initiatives organized and carried out by women to actively try to stop extraction or change the regulations around it. So there have been like different peaceful protests or marches around the region organized by small groups, environmental groups like Climate Justice Taranaki and Taranaki Energy Watch. And also Climate Justice Taranaki has coordinated a series of tours around the production station, well sites, and infrastructure near Tikarangi, Stratford, and other areas of North and South Taranaki, with the aim to bring an awareness of the drilling occurring in the area near dairy farms and houses around the region. And throughout my research, I used mainly as my methods ethnographic interviews. So I interviewed 43 participants, of which 14 were women, and 6 of them were actively involved in environmental groups and in actions that aim to bring an awareness of the environmental degradation occurring and the social fractures that fracking had created among families and friends. And so they shared the stories and experiences with me, and the reasons of why they chose to act instead of sit quietly. And some pointed out to me how becoming active actually was a way for them to protect the future of future generations. Others have always had a personal interest in environmental causes and were involved in environmental issues like endangered species, like saving endangered species, and so on. Other addressed to me, it was a spiritual connection they have with the land because of their Maori ancestry or heritage. And for others, instead, it was a personal reason caused by health issues, caused by fracking that opened a Pandora's box, which was difficult to close and made it difficult for them to return to their previous life. So as I talked to my participants and to these women, a psychological and emotional earthquake seems to have impacted the way they have experienced their land and the trust they once felt toward regulators and council responsible for managing oil and gas activities in Taranaki. To some, this has resulted in experiencing a mix of sense of loss and grief. And among them, Abby, a gardener and activist, she defined their living situation and emotional turmoil as using the term solastalgia, which is a feeling that indicates the distress produced by environmental change or environmental degradation impacting people. And so she was able to pinpoint this feeling that she was living. But at the same time, she said that she went from being very active in her community through the years, active with environmental grassroots organizations as well, to then slowly distancing herself more and more in order to safeguard her emotional well-being and feeling less emotionally involved in the degradation occurring. Contrary to her, like other people, like Fiona, a local artist and activist, have adopted through the years a very combative attitude, very optimistic attitude about future changes. And Fiona expressed to me how her wish for the industry to cease existing sooner. She described her connection to the place as feeling a Maori, a force, feeling that connection with the mountain and the land has pushed her to keep what she identifies as her own safe and trying to keep that place safe also for future generations. Another participants I interviewed, Margaret, she stressed to me the same strength and the same idea of a sense of belonging that through time has strengthened. And she stressed to me that for her was like as well trying to see her property and making sure that her property will stay in her family and that her grandchildren will be able to enjoy the same landscape that she enjoyed. And she stays hopeful for the future because she thinks that a choice she has to make for the future generations, not just her own grandchildren. And she fights back. She believes that fighting back is the only way for herself to keep her mental well-being and optimism. During my research, I also had a chance to interview and grasp an indigenous perspective toward the situation and the fracking occurring in the area. And in my conversation with Robina, an educator from Narauiwi, who has been advocating and promoting sustainable practices through her work, she shared with me her activism, pointing out how she has been trying to make sure that there is more monitoring of water. She has a concern toward she expressed concern toward the toxic components of fracking, and despite seeing changes through consultation and the results of their direct complaints are minimal, and monitoring is still inadequate. And Robina expressed how this has impacted our spiritual connection with the land and how poorly managed decision can impact our identity as well. And another participant shared the same strong connection with the land and spiritual, and identifying how she can feel the pain fracking is causing to Mother Earth, Papatūānuku. However, contrary to Rubina, she's more discouraged by the impacts that her own activism can do, and she feels powerless and has lost the initial optimism of bringing a change in Taranaki. In opposite to this perspective, Sarah, a member of Taranaki Energy Watch, which, like I said before, is an environmental grassroots organization. Instead, she became more combative toward fracking as she became an active member of this organization after her and her husband got impacted by fracking near their property. And Sarah expressed how she had learned that for her, learning how fracking has been regulated has led to a path that 10 years ago she would have never imagined. And she went from a very quiet life as a teacher to finding herself standing in legal courts. And she expressed how there was some sort of need of legal justice, that she wanted legal justice for all the consequences and disorders and inability to understand how to keep oneself protected as irreparable damages to the land occur. And she described how everything started as she refused to give consent, and how being bullied by the companies trying to access her land led her to start challenging the companies. And in 2014, she began a series of appeals to the Environmental Court, along with the Taranaki Energy Watch group, over some of the regulations. And finally, in October 2020, the Environmental Court ruled in favor of the Taranaki Energy Watch request, imposing changes in the regulations around the petrochemical installations in Taranaki. And this was, as she described, a small stepping stone in what she said is a journey that won't end until there is more monitoring and transparency from oil and gas companies. So, as I tried to explain in this brief presentation, there are some various reasons that can bring women to be involved in environmental causes. And these go beyond that mothering and carrying stereotypical label that is often associated with them. And for some of them, as we've seen, there was a personal necessity to participate and stand up against fracking and oil and gas companies. For others, it was more a spiritual reason and a sense of protecting Mother Earth. And their stories have all highlighted the strength and the struggles and the sense of powerlessness and anguish, a disempowerment that as they've lived through as they witnessed changes in their surrounding environment, but also they've indicated how activism is a very fluctuating, it's not something studied that, so for many, they come back and forth to being active or not, and they say how as the landscape has changed, they've pointed out to me that also their psycho-emotional responses to it and to their own identity has been shaped. So this project for me represented a benchmark study to support a meaningful discussion on future proposed energy projects in fossil fuel dependent regions and open a dialogue on the concerns and risks that are faced with the regulations of fracking worldwide, and the future of energy in the landscape of is changing in Taranaki, but continuing to ethnographically investigate the sociocultural environmental impacts of extractive practices can allow us to avoid mistakes and situations to happen in the future. And as we all know, we are currently living in a time of ecological crisis, and I believe that ethnographies can help unveil the hidden struggles people face with extraction as they experience and live through environmental degradation and the social fractures that extraction can create in the communities. Listening to the voices of people and participants can open a discussion on what needs to be improved, but also can help understand these dynamics and the dynamics that are created among communities and landscape. And that way we can foster also and encourage more collaborative and mindful approaches toward the environment. And listening to the stories that you listen today, to women's stories of activism can also help to go beyond that, especially like in environmental justice movements and studies, to avoid the continuation of a generalization of gender standards and stereotypes, and a rigid way of seeing how women get involved. It's not just because of one explanation, but there are various reasons why. Thank you again so much to Kevin, and I hope you will enjoy this presentation. Thank you.